So, welcome. You know, it's not time to start yet, but we're all pretending that we're on The View.
And I was pretending to be Meghan McCain about guns, and that's what that joke, and it, yeah, oh God.
This is not on.
Miles isn't, can we turn Miles on?
No, we don't need to.
Oh my God.
Nobody
All
wants
right,
to hear us
that's
talk.
the most mortifying thing that can happen to me today.
Hello. Can y'all hear us? No?
Check, check, check. Mine's much quieter than yours, but I think it's on.
Oh yeah, this is on.
They're all on. Yeah.
We're all on.
It's just Maggie's is amped up.
We have always on availability.
TC39, always on. JavaScript, always on.
Always on.
Hello. Getting a little louder, I think.
Yeah.
Has anybody seen the episode of South Park where the internet goes out and they like have to go west for the internet?
California.
It's great. And then at the end they figure out that they need to unplug and replug in the router. The giant world router.
Classic router.
Classic router. And then the internet comes back on and they all get to move back to their homes.
So what's the deal with DNS?
So what's the deal with DNS?
How does it even work? I don't know. Like it's just some person who's just like, oh, you want to go here?
Yep.
One time I saw an interesting online review where someone was complaining that they couldn't configure DNS on their computer. And then after a long time, I figured out that they meant Dragon Naturally Speaking, the software. But I was like, why would you want to configure DNS on your home PC?
Well, because sometimes you want to route Twitter to not Twitter. It's like classic life hack. Facebook.com, localhost.
Oh, dude, it's 9:40. We can start. We're slowly rolling into the start. So, hi, everyone. We're all waving. Okay. So I'm Maggie, and I'm the person who's listed as moderating this panel out there. But we thought that it would be more fun to do this sort of the View style. So this is we're gonna try something a little different here and just ask each other questions and see what the answers are. Okay. But I guess to start out, for anybody in the audience who doesn't know, ECMA TC39 is the standards committee that creates ECMAScript, which nobody calls it ECMAScript but us. You call it JavaScript. But the people who are causing you all of this pain because you need to adopt Babel and Webpack and all of these new features are us.
You're welcome.
We're sorry also.
This is a small subset of people who regularly attend TC39. The committee actually usually gets about 50 people per meeting. We meet every other month at places around the world, usually in the US, though we're trying to get better about being outside the US. TC39 is comprised of member companies. I think this is an important distinction. A lot of people don't really get their head around. No individual is a member of TC39. Only mostly companies, but also academic institutions, foundations, organizations are members of TC39, and they send delegates. All of us have been delegates at one point or another in our life. All of us are active right now on one proposal or another. So that's kind of the short version of TC39 and what it is and does. I think we'll go around and all introduce ourselves. You start.
Okay, hi. I'm Brian Turleson. I work at Microsoft doing JavaScript stuff and TypeScript stuff. And I'm currently the editor of the ECMAScript spec.
I'm Maggie Pint. I work for Microsoft on SRE for the web, SRE for the browser, and also on open engineering and how we bring open source development practice into Microsoft. And on TC39, I work a lot on datetime and internationalization, so I'm driving the new datetime APIs.
I'm Miles Borens. I'm a developer advocate at Google Cloud Platform, focused mostly on Node.js. At TC39, I'm part of the Code of Conduct Committee, and I'm the champion for the top-level await proposal. And I've also volunteered to be part of a chair group that we're putting together now for 2019.
I'm James Snell. I'm engineer at Nearform, also on the Node technical steering committee contributor there, and most of my involvement with TC39 is with my Node hat on. So.
And I'm Jory, and I'm the standards liaison for Boku. At TC39, I work a lot on management groups like the Code of Conduct Committee, as well as archival and that kind of fun stuff.
So what do we want to talk about? This is the fun thing. Very few of us have actually seen the view.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I have a question actually for Brian, which is, to tell us a little bit about the responsibilities of being editor of the specification, because that's really interesting to me.
Sure. So the editor is a role that is a sort of facilitation role. Like, it's not a role where you're doing proposals. It's a role where you're helping basically smooth the process. Like, if someone has an idea for a feature and they want to get this feature in, but they don't exactly know how to write the spec text to make it work, the editor helps with that. Likewise, I think most people in the committee are working every day on proposals. They're looking at, kind of the next thing. Whereas the editor is often focused on, like, where are we now? How can we improve the document? How can we make it easier to understand? How can we improve these pictures or diagrams or other things like that? Make the wording more clear. As a practical matter, we also do a lot of the GitHub wrangling and other work like that. So it's.
Just wondering, you said understanding. Specs are kind of hard to understand.
It's true, they're very hard.
How do you suggest people start getting ready to actually read one of those things?
Yeah, it's tough. So I've actually recently, this cycle, did some work in the new clause 5, the 5th clause of the spec. I believe it's 5. But anyway, I tried to move a bunch of the stuff that described how to read the document, like the conventions and how the algorithms work, and like the spec has its own kind of programming language. Some people call it like ECMASpeak, but it's kind of like a plain English description of how algorithms work. But you have to write it in a sort of particular way. So I put all of that stuff in kind of one section. So that kind of helps. So that, like, if you read that one thing first, you can start to approach the rest of the document. But don't try to read it cover to cover. Other than starting at the front, just don't do it. It's not going to be good. Find something that I would say, if you're trying to start working up your spec text muscle, take a small test case and just try to run it through the spec. Start with something very small, hopefully something that you already understand. That's kind of how I did it. I approached it from early on, just looking at a small test case, trying to figure out, what does the spec say this should do? Something simple like x equals 1 is actually, plumbs through quite a bit of different sections of the document.
My initiation into spec reading was as a maintainer of Moment.js, where people would say, well, why does it behave like this? And we're like, well, actually, that's the data object in JavaScript. And then we'd have to answer why. And that was a very fun adventure through the spec text around date. I have it close to memorized now. Just answering people's questions, like, why is my date like this?
And having gone through editing and other specs and stuff, I mean, I know it's a very thankless job, and the job that Brian has done on it for the past, a couple of years now has just been absolutely amazing. So thank you for that work.
This year, I've also been lucky to have help from Bradley Fries and Jordan Harband, who've been a great help in driving a lot of the work forward. Sorry to kick you.
Brian can kick me all he wants. Can I bring up controversy?
Oh, of course.
I want to bring up controversy.
Drama.
So here, I wrote this one out. So in the last year, the JS community expressed a lot of pain and consternation over Smooshgate. In this instance, The adding of a new property of flatten to the array prototype caused a breaking change in all websites consuming the classic library MooTools. TC39 elected to choose a different name to avoid this breakage, and Smoosh was floated as an alternative. The community was up in arms over the idea of this API existing in the language. And many people declared that TC39 was totally disconnected from its users. So I want to talk about what really happened there because I think it's important. Brian, I know you care about. Do you want to? Who wants to start for Smooshgate?
I like Smoosh as a name, so I'm gonna.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay out of it.
Okay, I'll say a couple things. So let me first say that it's as a developer, I want good things, and it's really frustrating to not be able to deliver friendly APIs because the web has done a whole bunch of stuff that.
Why can't we just break it?
Unfortunately, that just isn't a good thing to do. Like the real problem is that as developers we kind of feel like we want to hold other developers to account for doing a bad thing. Like for the MooTools case, to explain a little bit about the problem, the way MooTools worked is it would add a whole bunch of properties to array prototype, and they added a flatten method, and if ours doesn't do the exact same thing, then there's differences there and websites break. But going back, I think as many as 10 years, the advice was repeated over and over: don't augment the prototypes. It's not a good idea. So it feels kind of bad to that. But the real problem is that the people who suffer when you break the web aren't the developers. Like they've moved on. Nobody is maintaining a MooTools site. They're not going to feel this pain. The pain will be suffered by the users who are just trying to do what they're trying to do on the internet. And users aren't going to be sympathetic to developers saying, well, we had this really fancy new thing that we needed, so sorry. Like that's not something that we can do.
We've had a long-running similar issue in core with the Graceful FS module, right? So the short version is the FS module in Node doesn't quite work as well on on Windows and a couple other platforms. So this Graceful FS module exists to kind of paper over some of those rough edges, right? But it does so in a way that reaches into core, monkey patches the heck out of it, right? And does things that in ways that are not officially supported. Well, there's tons of people that are using Graceful FS, including NPM and a few others. The way that it works, though, there's certain changes we cannot make inside core on the private APIs without breaking it, and so we want to make things better. This is why we can't have nice things, because of users.
But they're private APIs. Just break them, right?
Of course, yeah.
I think both of you are speaking to a good point here, which is that the specs have multiple stakeholders and constituencies, and those constituencies aren't always us web developers or implementers. That it's a lot of people that are impacted by these decisions. And so my question to our view style group here is like, how do you think about balancing that? Because you can't get it all done.
Yeah, I mean, in Node, we try to balance it with semantic versioning. And that would be when you talk about don't break the web, which is one of the prime directives of the TC39. In Node, we can kind of break Node. There's a version number that we move to break it. But even though we have Semver, which would seem to solve this problem, it doesn't actually solve the problem. Because if we break a huge amount of the ecosystem, like if we make a change and it breaks Gulp, and all of a sudden every single website that's using Gulp, or Gulp I think is even embedded in WordPress now. So you even have people who don't necessarily write JavaScript who are going to be broken by these changes. You can't just do it, even if you're saying, oh, it's okay, I bumped the number. So you just can't do these things, and it's a responsibility. We use tools to figure it out. We also revert changes. Node has a little bit more flexibility on this because we can just bump a version, but the internet doesn't get the same kind of luxury. These things need to be worked out in committee through many stakeholders in advance to make sure that we don't break the world.
Code from 2008, code from 95 still goes to the browser. be on a modern browser, but it's still going to get code from 95, from 2008. Code from 2010, we're in 2018, and code from 2010 looks dead now, if you look at it in JavaScript. One thing that I think I really have to call out is that you as developers are extremely expensive resources. And so the idea that every business ever is going to hire a web developer to modernize its web stack every 4 years, like, do you know anybody who owns a small business? How tight those margins are? You can't just say, well, they should modernize. Like, that's not fair.
And one thing we need to those of us that are actually working on the platforms need to recognize is that tools like MooTools and GracefulFS exist for a reason. With GracefulFS, somebody had a reason to write this module that papered over the rough edges in Node. We have to get a better job of responding to that and fix the rough edges to make tools like GracefulFS unnecessary for the ecosystem, right? So that we're not extenuating those things, and we're not just breaking people just to say we want fancier things.
What do we land on for the alternative name? It's not flat and it's not smoosh. It's
the latest one is flat. I haven't kept up on the issue thread, but last I heard there was some minor breakage with that API as well. So
Yeah, it was high charts, though I believe they were working with us.
okay, so yeah, we might be able to work around it.
Yep. Let's kick another little topic off here. One question that I got, I put on an online forum that I've gotten from quite a few people is functional programming. Like, a lot of developers are looking for functional features. What have we got going on to make functional programming better?
pattern matching.
Yep, pattern matching I think is a big one. Pattern matching is a way to essentially use the destructuring patterns that you're familiar with that were added in ES6 to actually match against certain objects or arrays. So like if you wanted to match a point, you can just write a literal object, literal x, y, and that will invoke sort of like a switch statement. It'll run that code if the thing that you're pattern matching against has that shape. It's also an expression, which makes it really handy to use in functional style code. So yeah, I think pattern matching is a really big one. Pipeline, the pipeline operator is another thing that's in the pipeline. Very proud of that one. I hope my mom is watching. That one I think will pay major dividends for functional programming style because it makes it really easy just to import small functions from libraries and compose them together in really useful and powerful ways.
One thing I'll add about functional programming features, there have been a lot asked to TC39 for various features that are common in functional languages like Haskell. And I don't understand this perfectly. A better language developer than me could explain this better. But anytime that you add syntax to a programming language, effectively you've used it. Like question mark dot is syntax that's in the pipeline right now, and everybody wants it. And I think the whole committee wants question mark dot because it's so darn useful. But once you use question mark dot, you can't use it again. And there's sort of a finite amount of syntax that can be used in a programming language. And for that reason, the committee doesn't necessarily jump all over adding new syntax for functional features or for anything else, because like one day you'll run out of syntax. So I think we see a lot of asks for functional programming features, for other stuff that could only be done through new syntax. And if you see resistance, it's because like we don't want to run out.
Yeah, there's only so much room left for new features, so a lot of our work on the committee is trying to find where that right balance is. JavaScript is multi-paradigm, and I think it will always be that way. But yeah, we have to make oftentimes really hard choices about what makes it in, simply because the budget for new syntax is, as a matter of physics, finite.
APIs are easier. Way easier.
APIs are much easier, yeah.
So I tend to see it at an opposite end of this, not from the spec text, adding a cool new feature, but within Node, there's always a lag when these things can come in. And the users want to start using these things right away, so they turn to transpilers, they turn to these tools that make it work, but not necessarily in a spec compliant way, not necessarily in a performant way. Right, so we got to customers and they're like, hey, we're using this new stuff, it's slow, why? Like, well, if you want it to be fast, don't use the new stuff because it hasn't quite been optimized yet, so we actually, from a user perspective, actually out helping users make this stuff happen, I would prefer that the language slow down, allow the engines to actually optimize this stuff before they add anything more, so.
It's worth noting that there have been a lot of issues with change management in JavaScript. Right now, there's an impassioned debate about whether decorators should come before or after the export statement. And a lot of, I like the number of people in the audience laughing. How many people know about the impassioned debate around decorator position? Okay, 2 in the front. 1 in the back, cool. Yeah, but basically, the decorators proposal has been floating around TC39 for quite some time. And I think a lot of people want it, but the problem is it's already shipped in a lot of places. It's shipped in TypeScript. And so what happens is when you implement a proposal that is not finalized, and in fact decorators is still in stage 2. That's early. That's early days, even though it feels like it's been in process for a long time. Because it has, it's at a relatively early stage, and then you hit something kind of foundational in language design about whether the decorators come before or after, and now we get stuck with inability to change, and so like.
I guess like a good thing that we can add to that though is like, how do we actually make a decision? So like when we find ourselves here, like why does it take so slow? Like, how are we making that decision?
I think more often than not, the users end up making the decision for us. If syntax is useful, they create a transpiler that uses it. And then they go off and say, hey, and then we're like, okay, I guess we're doing that.
But if one person from the committee doesn't agree with that, it doesn't move forward.
Yeah.
So that was the softball I was going for. But just mostly like around how the consensus works at the committee. Like the committee can vote, but we never, like we vote once a year on the spec itself, and I've never heard someone say no. But if there's...
Because you've had all the arguments up to that point,
Yeah.
so, it's that, but it's very much like a push and pull process, which I think does a service of slowing some things down, but to your point, in that slowing down, users may run out and go ahead and...
I think also there's a little bit of a backlog from the giant spec that was ES6 still. The ES6, when the spec came out, added just huge amount of stuff, like the biggest update to the language ever. And I was working on Chakra at the time, and it was a monumental effort, years long, to implement and years to optimize that stuff, and I don't think any engine has even fully finished that stuff. I know V8 was just recently making major strides in promise performance, right? Like these have been around for, a while, but it's just, you got to get there.
This does segue into another topic I had in mind. So, like with promises and modules and, some of these features that did come in through ES6, they've actually caused some contention within Node because we don't quite know how to implement them. And part of the reason was, from Node's point of view, it's like, man, that TC39, they implemented, they spec'd stuff that we didn't like. Why weren't they listening to us? Well, it turned out we weren't at the table, we weren't in the room, saying, hey, this doesn't work for us. So they're like, okay, we're gonna push forward on the things we know. And within Node, we're all like, they don't care about us, but TC39 really does care about the project itself. We just have to be in the room. So when you look at these things, how they're developed, there's WhatWG, there's TC39, there's Node, there's different places that are working on these common elements. Like, like where are they starting to come together, right? How are we starting to get some coalescing here?
No, I got
That's
nothing.
a great question, I think, because my point of view is that a lot of times this like human connection and the interoperability of human beings having conversations and talking about these problems is a lot harder than like, well, maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but it seems like it's harder than the technical bit sometimes, and that's where things can fall down, because we don't have the right people at the table. We don't have a nice representative. If we don't have a nice representative sample of stakeholders, then, you know.
It's worth noting that I feel like a lot of people have the conception of TC39 as something like an open source project. And actually, we are very much on GitHub. We have all of our active work is public on GitHub. You are welcome to come comment. We merge pull requests to the spec from outside contributors upon occasion. But when it comes to actual meetings, meeting minutes, meeting notes, being in the meetings, ECMA bylaws prevent us from running that like an open forum.
That's part of its requirements as a NGO in Switzerland. That's like law, sorry.
But there are people who are trying to work on process to make new ways for people to engage.
Exactly.
And a lot of progress has been made since the days of ES6.
And I guess maybe that's like a good segue into the question about, like, you know, the committee's changed a lot. I've been participating for just about 2 years. The first meeting that I showed up to was the first time that a code of conduct was even brought up. But, you know, what kind of changes have people on the panel been seeing in the last couple of years around diversity and inclusivity, and just ways that people can contribute and participate?
One great one is now when you walk into the meeting, it's not just all dudes.
We still need more folks from underrepresented groups, but I think the committee has made improvements to that end and just done a lot more to actively recruit people with different opinions, and that makes a big difference. Just letting them know that there's a seat at the table for them if they want to come. And despite the fact that the meetings are generally closed to delegates, there's also opportunities for folks to join as invited guests. So if you think your organization is interested in participating in a deeper way, or if you have you know, an area of expertise you think would be beneficial to a proposal, like, get in touch with one of us so we can make sure that you're invited to a meeting.
I think that's another point is, you know, it's diversity in experience levels is another thing that I've seen. You know, before it was, you know, there was this view of it being a fairly elitist group. You know, the real language nerds kind of group, but it has really started to you know, be a lot more open to folks that have different experience backgrounds. So that's exciting to see.
I always like to call out, I have absolutely no language background. I have no computer science degree. And Brian recruited me. The last 2 years of my life, so much has been because of Brian. Thanks, friend.
You are welcome. And for it, we all get a new date. So.
Yeah, and I was recruited specifically because of, you heard me mention Moment.js, I'm from that library, specifically because of subject matter expertise in date and time. And so I think you don't have to, like you can't run under the assumption that to participate in TC39, you need to be a languages person. Every meeting, it's poor Bradley Ferrace who has to explain it to me. I don't know why he explains things really clearly. And so I'm always like, Bradley, I don't get it. I need you to draw it on the whiteboard. And like, they help me out a lot, and it's appreciated.
Another change I've seen, I've been kind of tangentially involved and then more involved in the last year. But Brian, the TCQ app that you created, I think has made a huge impact on productive conversation and movement in the group. And
yeah,
thank you for that.
This is an app that, so just the meeting is right now 50 people sitting around a table. And so you can imagine, like, at Thanksgiving, you know, it's really tough.
People with opinions.
Right, and it's sometimes hard to get a word in, you know, when the debates are getting heavy.
Somebody's slinging.
You know, even you'll split off into subgroups, but we can't do that as the committee. We need everybody in the same conversation so you can achieve consensus among everyone there. So I built an app that just is like a simple queue where people can say that they want to make a point, and they go into a queue, and when it's their turn, it's their turn, and that makes, I think, lowers the barrier to entry. You don't need to, like, you know, like, like jump in the middle of something. You just type in a box and hit submit.
World's most tricked out hand raising app.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is. It's really good. And then, you know, the chairs have done a really good job making sure that, you know, kind of we're moving forward. And I think
We have 2 minutes. Do we have any like wrap up things? I'm just calling out.
I think we should talk about, you know, since we've talked about how people can get involved, like other things beyond like proposals.
You should definitely check out the GitHub if you haven't. There's a lot of the main repo that I would say it would be most interesting for the people here is github.com/tc39/proposals. That is the proposal pipeline. Everything almost that we're considering for inclusion into JavaScript, and including some things that we've rejected, which are often interesting, are in that list. And the way those proposal repos work is they're owned by a champion. That's a TC39 delegate who is sort of taken the responsibility to push that proposal through the process. And you can interact directly with the champion on the GitHub. You can ask questions. You can, you know, even provide insights or push back on some of their design ideas. And basically just get involved in the process. I think that's a great and fun way to do it.
All the agenda notes are also available online. So if you're looking at a proposal and trying to figure out why was this decision made, or how do we get here, you can clone all of the agenda notes from pretty much every meeting ever and just do a fuzzy search against that. So, you know, look for a certain word. I guess similarly to the spec, you probably don't want to start at the beginning and read all the notes. But you can go through those agenda items and pretty quickly put together a picture of, you know, like, what's the history of this thing. And that's really important if you want to suggest a change, or you want to figure out how to do something. And I think this is for all of open source, but just like having that context before you step forward will really improve your chances of success. And if people see that you put in that effort to educate yourself, they're going to be far more likely to want to work with you and support you and help you be successful.
Right. You know, and you know, earlier in the conversation, you're kind of talking about people going off and using the things that aren't quite finished yet. But no standard is good without having that user feedback and users actually going out and experimenting and using these things. So as these proposals come up, it is actually very good to kick the tires, use these the transpilers, use the features, and provide feedback to the community. It just has to be in a way that's beneficial to everybody, to the whole process. Right? So.
Do it eyes wide open.
Yes. Yes.
I also want to call out another related project, which is Test 262. That's the test suite for ECMAScript. That's actually what taught me how to do spec reading.
Yeah.
It taught me how the language works, and it's pretty much why I'm right here right now. And it's really easy to sort of get started with this. There's like any test suite, it's never complete. There's always new areas that you can go and dig into and investigate. It's also a great way to practice your spec reading. There's plenty of like infrastructure questions going on there, like and also in sort of related projects. So if you're into sort of software testing and stuff, this is a pretty interesting space to get into.
And they love contributions.
Love contributions.
They love it.
Great place to get started.
I think. Go ahead, James.
I was just going to say Buku deserves a huge amount of respect for what they've done with Test 262.
Leo and Rick and the team there, amazing people.
I think we gotta go. I think we gotta let y'all go. Sorry if we were boring. Awesome to have you here. Love to hear your questions when we get off the stage.
Yeah, grab us, say hi, ask questions. Thank
You
you.
need to take a selfie. Is that what you're doing? Oh no.